Tay hovered nervously at the airlock entrance as the decontamination cycle completed. Her translucent wings fluttered against her back, betraying her anxiety despite her scientific training. The Earth atmosphere felt thick and heavy compared to the rarefied air of her homeworld. Breathe normally, she reminded herself, the universal translator at her throat converting her musical language to standard Earth English. Their gravity is slightly stronger, but within tolerable parameters. The inner door slid open with a soft hiss. Tay took her first steps onto Earth soil, or rather, the polished floor of the Global Xenoscience Institute. Her compound eyes adjusted quickly to the lighting, which humans kept dimmer than the bright environments Lumi preferred. A human male stood waiting. He wore the blue uniform of the scientific division, a simple badge identifying him as Dr. Jean. "Welcome to Earth Station," he said, bowing slightly rather than extending his hand. Someone had briefed him on Lumi customs, Tay realized with relief. "Thank you for receiving me," Tay replied, her antennae dipping in the traditional greeting of her people. "I am xenobiologist Tay of the Lumi Science Academy. It is my honor to participate in this exchange." Jean smiled, revealing flat teeth quite unlike the serrated feeding appendages of Lumi. "The honor is ours. You're the first Lumi scientist assigned to our facility." He guided her through corridors filled with humans going about their work. Each time they passed someone, Tay couldn't help but stare. Humans were so soft. Their skin stretched and moved with their bodies in ways that fascinated her. The Lumi exoskeleton provided protection but limited flexibility. Humans seemed almost vulnerably exposed, yet moved with remarkable freedom. "This will be your research station," Jean explained as they entered a laboratory space. "We've adjusted the environmental controls to Lumi standards during your work hours." Tay clicked her mandibles in appreciation. "Most considerate." As Jean demonstrated the equipment, Tay found herself distracted by his movements. When he reached for something on a high shelf, the muscles in his arm visibly shifted beneath his skin. When he turned his head, the neck rotated with fluid grace. Every motion revealed new aspects of human physiology that her textbooks had failed to capture. "Is something wrong?" Jean asked, noticing her intense gaze. "Forgiveness," Tay said quickly. "I am observing. Your soft tissue anatomy functions differently than our literature suggested." Jean laughed. "I imagine I'm doing the same with you. Your bioluminescent patches are fascinating." Tay hadn't realized her excitement had triggered her light displays. The patches along her forearms were pulsing with the blue-green pattern that signified scientific curiosity. "A physiological response," she explained. "We communicate much through light as well as sound." "Maybe you can teach me some basics," Jean suggested. "Cultural exchange is part of our mission too." Their first experiment together was simple, measuring baseline physiological responses to the Earth environment. Jean helped attach sensors to the gaps between Tay's exoskeletal plates where her sensitive skin was exposed. "Your heart rate is faster than ours," he noted, watching the readings. "And your body temperature fluctuates more widely." "Humans maintain remarkable homeostasis," Tay replied. "Your internal temperature barely changes despite environmental conditions." When Jean placed a monitoring device against his wrist, Tay couldn't resist reaching out with a delicate appendage. "May I?" she asked. Jean nodded. Tay gently pressed her sensory filament against his skin. The contact sent readings flowing directly to her brain: a temperature, texture, elasticity, the subtle pulse of blood beneath the surface. "Extraordinary," she whispered. "Your skin contains so many receptors, yet lacks protective hardening." "Evolution took different paths on our worlds," Jean said, "but accomplished similar goals." As their workday ended, Tay made her way to her specially prepared quarters. The room had been modified with perches rather than human furniture, and the lighting adjusted to the ultraviolet spectrum Lumi found restful. Settling onto her sleeping perch, Tay began recording her observations. Day 1 of Earth assignment. Human physiology continues to surprise despite extensive preparation. Their bodies demonstrate resilience through adaptability rather than protection. Their skin serves as both sensor and barrier. Their endoskeletal structure allows movement patterns impossible for Lumi. She paused, antennae twitching thoughtfully. Subject gene demonstrates typical human characteristics. Further study is warranted. His offer of cultural exchange presents optimal opportunity for closer observation of human capabilities. Tay's bioluminescent patches glowed with excitement as she prepared for sleep. Tomorrow would bring new discoveries about these fascinating humans. Tay arrived early at the laboratory, her antennae twitching with excitement. 3 weeks had passed since her arrival on Earth, and each day brought new discoveries about human physiology that left her scientific mind buzzing. Gene entered the lab carrying a small container of water and a towel draped around his neck. His face was flushed, and tiny droplets of moisture covered his skin. "Good morning," he said between deep breaths. "Sorry if I'm late. I went for a run before work." Tay's compound eyes widened. "You engaged in recreational movement already?" "The sun has barely risen." Gene took a long drink of water. 5 kilometers. Helps me think better during the day. Tay pulled out her datapad and began noting this information. "And this physical exertion, you do this regularly?" "Most mornings. Sometimes longer on weekends." "You ran for how long?" Tay asked, her voice rising with disbelief. Gene wiped his face with the towel. "My last weekend run was 20 kilometers. About 2 hours." "And afterward? Did you require medical attention? Nutrient supplements? Rest period?" Gene laughed. "Just a shower and breakfast. Maybe a little stretching." Tay's recording light flashed rapidly as she documented this exchange. On her world, such extended physical activity would require days of recovery. The Lumi body, while efficient for short bursts of movement, could not sustain prolonged exertion. "May I collect data?" she asked, already reaching for monitoring equipment. Gene nodded, now accustomed to her scientific curiosity. Tay attached small sensors to his wrist, neck, and temple. "Your heart rate is elevated but already returning to baseline," she noted. "Temperature regulation through perspiration is actively cooling your system." "Fascinating." Gene smiled. "Basic human biology. Nothing special." On the contrary, Tay corrected him. Among known spacefaring species, human endurance capacity ranks among the highest recorded. The Balaxians can move faster, but only for seconds. The Dracs have greater strength but require frequent rest periods. She hesitated before adding, "May I examine your musculature more directly?" Gene rolled up his sleeve. "Go ahead." Tay gently pressed her sensory appendage against his forearm, measuring density, elasticity, and temperature. Her scientific instruments could provide precise data, but direct tactile information added context her people valued highly. "The microtears from exercise are already beginning repair processes," she said. "Your body actually strengthens from damage rather than being weakened by it. That's how muscle building works," Gene explained. "Stress, recovery, adaptation." Throughout the day, Tay's questions continued. When Gene casually mentioned staying awake for 36 hours during a previous research emergency, she insisted on reviewing his medical records from that period. "Your cognitive function remained at 87% efficiency despite severe sleep deprivation," she noted with astonishment. "Lumi mental capacity drops below 40% after just 6 hours without rest." Gene shrugged. "Coffee helps." During their lunch break, Tay watched in fascination as Gene consumed food. The Lumi digestive process involved slow absorption of nutrients through specialized membranes. Humans, by contrast, physically crushed their food and processed it internally with remarkable efficiency. "Your species can derive energy from such a wide variety of organic material," she observed. "Even substances that would be toxic to most species." Gene paused mid-bite of his sandwich. "Like what?" "Capsaicin. Caffeine. Ethanol. Many plant defense compounds that evolved specifically to deter consumption." "You mean spicy food, coffee, and alcohol?" Gene laughed. "Those are pleasures, not survival necessities. Tay's bioluminescent patches pulsed with surprise. You consume defensive toxins for enjoyment? That evening, they designed an experiment to test human temperature adaptation. Jean volunteered to demonstrate by briefly exposing his hand to water of varying temperatures while Tay measured physiological responses. You maintained function between 10 and 45 degrees Celsius, Tay said, reviewing the results. With minimal protection, you can briefly tolerate even wider ranges. Humans evolved on a planet with extreme variation, Jean explained. Our ancestors had to adapt to everything from deserts to ice ages. As Tay returned to her quarters that night, her mind raced with new information. She carefully uploaded her findings to the central Lumi database, adding detailed annotations about human resilience. Subject continues to demonstrate remarkable adaptability, she recorded in her personal notes. Their bodies contain seemingly contradictory properties, fragile external covering yet extraordinary repair capabilities. Limited strength compared to many species yet unparalleled endurance. She paused, her antennae twitching thoughtfully. Tomorrow I will observe Jean in the physical training facility. If humans can genuinely improve their capabilities through deliberate stress application, this challenges fundamental Lumi biological assumptions. Tay's exoskeleton vibrated with excitement. The universe suddenly seemed larger, with possibilities she had never considered. And these humans, so new to the galactic community, might hold biological secrets that could change everything. The emergency alarm blared through the research facility, its pulsing red light causing Tay's compound eyes to rapidly adjust. She had been examining cellular samples when the first warning sounded. Attention all personnel. Environmental containment failure in Sector 7. All non-essential staff evacuate immediately. Emergency teams report to control. Tay's antennae flattened against her head as she processed the announcement. Sector 7 housed the station's main environmental systems. A failure there meant the carefully maintained atmosphere throughout the facility could quickly become unstable. Jean burst into the laboratory, his face serious. Tay, we need to evacuate. The backup systems are failing. What happened? Tay asked, already securing her research materials. The heat exchanger ruptured. Temperature is rising throughout the facility, and oxygen levels are dropping as the filtration system struggles. The station's AI provided an update, warning, environmental parameters exceeding safety margins. Sector 7 now at 38 degrees Celsius and rising. Oxygen concentration at 17% and falling. Tay felt her exoskeleton tighten in response to the rising heat. For humans, these conditions were uncomfortable but manageable. For Lumi, whose homeworld maintained a consistent cool temperature, the rising heat posed a serious biological threat. We must reach the emergency shelter, Jean said, guiding her toward the door. They're setting up species-appropriate environments there. They hurried through corridors that were already noticeably warmer. Tay could feel her movements becoming less fluid as her body responded to the temperature changes. The joints between her exoskeletal plates began to stiffen. Jean, she said, her voice strained, my thermoregulation cannot compensate much longer. Lumi biology is not adapted to rapid temperature increases. Jean looked at her with concern. How bad is it? At 40 degrees, my systems will begin shutting down to prevent permanent damage. They passed a monitoring station where several humans were working frantically at control panels. One looked up as they passed. The manual override failed, the technician reported. The only working control panel is in the central hub, but that section is already over 40 degrees with oxygen levels below 15%. Jean stopped. If someone could reach that panel, could they restore the systems? Theoretically, yes. But no one can get there now. The environmental suits are locked in the compromised section. Tay noticed Jin's expression change. She had studied human facial expressions enough to recognize determination. I can make it, he said. That's impossible, the technician argued. Even if you could handle the heat, the oxygen levels are uncomfortable but not immediately lethal for humans, Jean finished. Our ancestors evolved in variable conditions. We can temporarily function in extremes. Tay's scientific mind processed this information against everything she had learned about human physiology. Jean, the distance to the central hub is considerable. Even with human endurance. I've run marathons in desert heat, Jean said, already removing his lab coat. This is just a very uncomfortable sprint. The technician gave Jean the access codes while Tay watched with growing concern. Her own body was already struggling with the current conditions. What Jean proposed seemed beyond biological possibility. Be careful, she said, the words feeling inadequate. Jean nodded and headed toward the sealed doorway that led to the affected sectors. Tay watched on the security feed as he entered the overheated area. The temperature display showed 42 degrees Celsius. On screen, Jean moved quickly but methodically. His skin glistened with sweat, the human cooling mechanism that had so fascinated Tay during their research. His breathing became labored as he pushed deeper into the affected area, but he didn't slow. Oxygen levels now at 14%, the AI announced. Critical systems failing in 4 minutes. Tay's vision began to blur as her own body struggled with the heat spreading throughout the facility. The technicians applied cooling packs to her exoskeleton, but she refused to leave the monitoring station. On screen, Jean reached the central hub. The temperature there had climbed to 45 degrees. He staggered once, then steadied himself at the control panel. His fingers moved across the interface, entering commands with remarkable precision despite the conditions. Environmental systems rebooting, the AI announced after what seemed like an eternity. Cooling protocols initiated. Cool air began flowing through the vents. Tay felt immediate relief as her exoskeleton began to relax. On screen, Jean slumped against the control panel, clearly exhausted but conscious. When emergency teams brought him back, Tay was waiting. Jin's face was flushed red, his clothing soaked with sweat. Medical staff immediately began checking his vital signs. Temperature and oxygen returning to normal parameters, one announced. He'll be fine after rehydration and rest. Tay approached Jin's bed, her scientific curiosity now mixed with something new, profound respect. You risked biological damage to save the facility, she said softly. Jin smiled weakly. Just putting those human adaptations to practical use. I have studied human physiology for weeks, Tay admitted. But understanding capacity in theory is different from witnessing it in action. Sometimes, Jean said, you have to see what a body can do when pushed to its limits. Tay's bioluminescent patches glowed with the blue-green pattern of deepening understanding. Today, she had witnessed something that would forever change her perception of humans. The recreation room of the Global Xenoscience Institute had been transformed for the evening. Human and Lumi decorations adorned the walls, earth plants alongside luminescent Lumi art pieces that shifted colors in mesmerizing patterns. 2 weeks had passed since the environmental crisis, and tonight marked the official cultural exchange event that Jean and Tay had been planning. Is this positioned correctly? Jean asked, holding a traditional Lumi light sculpture near the ceiling. Tay's antennae moved appreciatively. Perfect. The refraction points will create our traditional greeting pattern when activated. Scientists from both species filled the room, their conversations creating a mix of human language and the musical clicks and trills of Lumi speech. The universal translators worked overtime, allowing everyone to share ideas freely. Jean had recovered completely from his ordeal during the environmental crisis. If anything, the experience had deepened the working relationship between him and Tay. Their research had expanded from pure xenobiology to include cultural anthropology. Attention everyone, the station director announced. Tonight we celebrate the knowledge exchange between our species. Our guests have prepared demonstrations of Lumi culture, and we will share some human traditions as well. Tay stepped forward, her exoskeleton gleaming under the lights. On behalf of the Lumi Science Academy, I thank you for this opportunity. We begin with our traditional light greeting. At her signal, the room darkened. The Lumi scientists activated their bioluminescent patches in perfect synchronization, creating waves of light that flowed through the room. The patterns told an ancient story of discovery and connection, a fitting choice for this gathering. The human scientists watched in awe. Even Jean, who had seen Tay's bioluminescence daily, was captivated by the coordinated display that transformed the simple recreation room into a living canvas of color and motion. When the lights returned, it was the humans' turn. Jean had arranged for a small group to demonstrate several Earth cultural traditions. The first was dance, a simple but elegant performance showing movements from different human cultures. Notice how their skeletons allow for such varied positions, Tay whispered to her Lumi colleagues. The internal bone structure provides both protection and remarkable flexibility. The dancers moved with grace through several styles, from fluid, gentle movements to energetic jumps and spins. The Lumi scientists watched with their compound eyes tracking every motion, their antennae tilted forward in concentration. Your dance movements reflect your internal skeletal structure, Tay observed later as the scientists mingled. Your art emerges directly from your biology. Jean nodded. I never considered it that way. What about Lumi art? Tay raised her forearms, revealing the most sensitive of her bioluminescent patches. She concentrated, and intricate patterns of light formed, not the coordinated display from earlier, but something more personal and complex. This is how we communicate emotion and history, she explained as the lights shifted from cool blues to warm ambers. Each sequence tells a story. This particular pattern shares the journey of scientific discovery. The evening continued with food exchanges, carefully selected for cross-species safety, music demonstrations, and scientific discussions that blended cultural insights with biological observations. During a quiet moment, Jean found Tay observing a human art installation, a simple water fountain where light played across the flowing liquid. What do you think? He asked. It's fascinating how humans create art from the very elements that sustain life, Tay replied. Water is precious on your world as on ours, yet you display it purely for aesthetic appreciation. We find beauty in necessity, Jean said. Speaking of which, I've been thinking about our research. He produced a data pad showing their combined notes on cross-species biology. What if we expanded this into a formal paper? Physiological Foundations of Cross-Species Cultural Development. We could examine how our different evolutionary paths shaped not just our bodies, but our entire civilizations. Tay's antennae quivered with excitement. A groundbreaking concept. The scientific community has studied comparative anatomy, but rarely connected it directly to cultural development. They spent the remainder of the evening outlining their idea, occasionally drawing other scientists into the discussion. By night's end, what had begun as casual conversation had evolved into a research proposal that bridged multiple scientific disciplines. As the event wound down, the station director approached them. I couldn't help overhearing your discussion. The Institute would fully support such a collaborative research initiative. In the following days, Jean and Tay worked tirelessly on their paper. Their unique perspectives complemented each other perfectly, Jean providing the human historical context while Tay offered insights from Lumi evolutionary biology. It's remarkable, Tay said as they reviewed their work. Your species walks upright, freeing your hands for tool use. This directly influenced your technological development. Our multiple limbs evolved for different purposes, leading to distinct technological solutions. And your exoskeleton protection allowed Lumi to develop in open environments, Jean added. While early humans relied on shelter and clothing. Their paper was submitted to the Galactic Scientific Journal with unprecedented co-authorship from both species. The review committee, comprised of scientists from 12 different worlds, unanimously approved it for priority publication. It's not just about biology anymore, Jean told Tay as they celebrated the acceptance. It's about understanding how our physical forms shape everything from our art to our architecture, our music to our mathematics. Tay's body glowed with the bright green pattern of scientific accomplishment. And perhaps, understanding these connections will help build stronger bridges between all sentient species. The day of Tay's departure had arrived too quickly. 6 months had passed since she first set foot in the Global Xenoscience Institute, nervous and filled with scientific curiosity. Now she stood on the same landing pad, but everything had changed. The Earth's sun cast long shadows across the facility as technicians loaded the last of her research materials onto the transport vessel. Jean stood beside her, both of them watching in silence as the preparations continued. "The Lumi Science Council has approved your application," Tay said, breaking the quiet moment. "You'll be the first human researcher invited to our homeworld." Jin's face brightened with a smile. "Really? That's incredible news. Your medical clearance and environmental adaptation program will begin next month. Our atmosphere and gravity are different, but not incompatible with human physiology." Jin nodded, his expression showing both excitement and apprehension. "I've been studying Lumi environmental conditions. The lower oxygen levels will be challenging." "You'll manage," Tay replied, her antennae moving in what Jin now recognized as the Lumi expression of confidence. "If there's one thing I've learned during my time here, it's that humans are remarkably adaptable." Their research paper had caused a sensation throughout the scientific community. Physiological foundations of cross-species cultural development had been translated into 27 galactic languages and sparked new fields of study across multiple disciplines. What began as curiosity about different physical forms had evolved into a deeper understanding of how biology shapes every aspect of civilization. "I brought you something," Jin said, holding out a small package wrapped in simple paper. "A human tradition when saying goodbye to friends." Tay carefully unwrapped it with her delicate appendages. Inside was a small device that projected a three-dimensional model of DNA, but with a modification. The standard human DNA helix slowly transformed into the triple spiral pattern of Lumi genetic material, then back again in an endless cycle. "It represents what we discovered together," Jin explained. Different structures achieving similar functions through diverse evolutionary paths. Tay's bioluminescent patches glowed with warm amber light, the Lumi expression of deep appreciation. "I have something for you as well." She presented Jin with a crystal containing suspended luminescent particles. When Jin touched it, the particles rearranged themselves in response to his body's electrical field. "This is a Lumi memory crystal," she explained. "It responds uniquely to each individual who holds it. When you arrive on my world, it will help you adjust to our forms of communication." The station's announcement system indicated the final boarding call for the Lumi transport vessel. The moment of departure had arrived. "Our research is just beginning," Tay said. "There are 17 other spacefaring species in the known galaxy, each with their own biological adaptations and cultural expressions." Jin smiled. "Maybe someday we'll study all of them together. The Galactic Council has expressed interest in expanding our research model. They've proposed establishing an interspecies biological cultural research initiative. With a less complicated name, I hope," Jin joked. Their friendship had grown alongside their scientific collaboration. What began as Tay's fascination with human physical capabilities had developed into mutual respect and understanding that transcended biological differences. As Tay prepared to board her vessel, Jin performed the traditional Lumi farewell gesture, a slow movement of his hands that mimicked the light patterns of respectful departure. He had practiced for weeks to get it right. Tay responded with a perfect human bow. "Until we meet again, colleague." "Safe journey, friend," Jin replied. From the viewport of her ship, Tay watched Earth grow smaller as they ascended. She activated her personal recording device for one final entry in her Earth research log. "Final day of Earth assignment complete. As I return to share my findings with the Lumi Science Academy, I carry more than data and specimens. I return with new understanding of how different evolutionary paths can lead to unique but equally valid forms of intelligence and culture." She paused, her compound eyes still fixed on the blue planet below. Initial hypothesis regarding human physiological capabilities has been extensively confirmed. Their bodies display remarkable adaptability, endurance, and resilience despite appearing fragile by Lumi standards. However, the most significant discovery was unexpected. Tay's antennae moved thoughtfully as she continued. "Physical differences between species need not be barriers to understanding. Rather, they offer unique perspectives that, when combined, create deeper insights than either could achieve alone." The human saying "the whole is greater than the sum of its parts" applies not just to systems but to interspecies cooperation. As Earth disappeared from view, replaced by the vast expanse of space, Tay felt not the conclusion of her research, but its true beginning. The galaxy suddenly seemed filled with limitless possibilities for discovery, all because she had once been fascinated by the strange, soft-bodied humans and their extraordinary physical capabilities. In 2 months, Jean would arrive on her world, and together they would continue exploring the beautiful complexity of life in all its forms.